Greetings and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. As an extension of my Instagram page, Cerebral Women, this podcast offers insights into the visual art world. I interview artists, mainly artists of color and female artists who will freely articulate what inspires their creativity. In addition, you'll hear interesting perspectives from dedicated art professionals who work with artists and the art institutions that feature them. I'm confident that collectively, these individuals will indeed stimulate your mind as they do our eyes. Please know these interviews are conducted in my Manhattan apartment, so please forgive the background sounds of city life. Welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. This episode features Dr. Monique Wells, a native of Houston, Texas, and a 32-year resident of Paris, France. Through her entrepreneurial work as a veterinary pathologist and toxicologist, travel professional, writer, speaker, and mentor, she embraces and harnesses the power of education to change lives. While working in Paris, she began researching the history of African Americans there, and with her husband, she formed the company Discover Paris, which first offered self-guided tours of locations associated with African Americans in Paris. This led to her discovery in the paupers division of a cemetery outside Paris of the unmarked grave of the distinguished artist Beauford Delaney, an American modernist painter well known for his work with the Harlem Renaissance in the 1930s and 40s. He suffered from mental illness and spent the last 4 years of his life in a psychiatric institution in the French capital. Fascinated with his story, Monique founded Les Amis de Beauford Delaney and raised funds for a tombstone to mark his grave. Loyal to the artist, she continues her research and work promoting the legacy of Beauford Delaney. Please visit cerebralwomen.com for her expanded bio to learn more about the work she does, her passion to empower individuals, especially women and persons of African descent. Her U.S.-based nonprofit Wells International Foundation includes L Cube Alliance, an effort supporting values-driven women leaders. Enjoy this episode featuring Dr. Monique Wells. Monique, welcome. I'm so delighted we met for coffee when I was in Paris. Just fascinated by your journey. Anyway, let's start with, what inspired you to move to Paris, leaving Houston, Texas?
First of all, I moved to Paris from Alameda, California. So born and raised in Texas, but went to the University of Pennsylvania for undergraduate and veterinary school, and then to the Ohio State University for graduate training in veterinary pathology. And then I moved back to Texas briefly before moving to the West Coast. All of that in pursuit of the career of veterinary pathology. So I moved to Paris from Alameda, California. And I moved there because from a very young age, I was enamored of the French language. I studied French literally all my life. I was exposed to the language in preschool and fell in love with it and studied all the way from preschool to grade 12. And then I went to college, and then I minored in French in college and supposedly excelled in French in college. I mean, I had excellent grades for all kinds of courses, wrote very involved research-based papers. And the first time that I wanted to organize a trip to Paris, this was years after I had graduated, I found out that I could not make a simple phone call and make a hotel reservation. And I was devastated. And so I thought to myself, okay, in order for me to make real use of this language, because I learned it because I wanted to speak after all, I decided that I needed to move to a French-speaking country. And though I had the opportunity to move to Canada, to Quebec, I don't like Quebecois French. I wanted to speak what I thought was pure French. And so I set my sights on France, and it was my career in veterinary medicine that took me to Paris.
Wonderful. My goodness. So once you got there, you became an entrepreneur at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the business you established in Paris, Entree to Black Paris.
Oh, I'm happy to talk about Entree to Black Paris. So, as I was saying, I did go to Paris to work as a veterinarian, a veterinary pathologist to be precise. My husband, I had met in the Bay Area through the Alliance Française, so we both have this love and passion for the French language. And we moved to Paris. He moved 3 months after I did, and he was unable to get work in his field, though I had been moved by the company that I went to work for, lock, stock, and barrel. He was not even a trailing spouse at that time. He was just trailing. We got married in France, but he was unable to find work in his field. And after looking for corporate positions and then doing several iterations of entrepreneurial activity, he hit upon the idea of doing a travel business, which at the time we named Discover Paris, personalized itineraries for independent travelers. And that business was what I consider to be a unique business. We had a business model in a company called Insiders Italy, where the woman who ran that business worked throughout Italy with the exception of Sicily, and she created self-guided itineraries. And so whatever you wanted to experience in Italy, she would write you a personalized guidebook. And while she did offer you the opportunity to be guided, so if you wanted to go to X church or whatever, she would have someone who could take you in there and explain about the architecture and the artwork, etc. The vast majority of what she did was self-guided. So I, being an introvert, really was amazed at this idea that I could travel to a foreign country and never work with a guide. I could just go around on my own, but be informed about what I wanted to see and do. And so my husband decided that we should do something like that for Paris. And we started it as Discover Paris, as I said. And I'm still working full time, mind you, as a veterinary pathologist. And I understood that African Americans, when we travel, we want to see where Black people are. We want to know what they are doing, what they have done, where they're living, where they did live, etc. And I decided that I would write just 4 self-guided tours that focused on different aspects of the African American experience in Paris. And those were just sort of in the can, if you will. And when people would contact us for their self-guided itinerary, if they were interested in Black Paris, we could pick and choose bits out of those walking tours and just plop them into the overall itinerary for our clients. And over the years, more and more people were asking about Black Paris exclusively, fewer and fewer people asking about Paris in general. And also, with the advancement of the use of the internet, we found that after a certain point, people just stopped asking for self-guided tours. They wanted to be guided. And so when we figured out that was not going to go away, we decided that we would turn our pre-written itineraries into guided tours. And from that, we developed more and more tours. So we went from 4 self-guided tours, which actually, if you were to purchase one of those in its entirety, it could take you an entire day or multiple days to do. We took pieces of those tours and turned them into guided walks that were focused on a particular geographical area within the city.
Amazing. Gosh. And I want to segue now into your adventure regarding Beauford Delaney. I'm just going to hand it off to you and you start how you feel you should.
Okay. It's actually a natural segue because the reason that I even learned about Beauford Delaney was because I started to write articles for online publications about the African American experience in Paris. And I was doing a series of articles for an online site called Soul of America. And one of the things that I discovered was that there were prominent people from the African American community who were buried in and around Paris. So I started to write an article about that. And in my mind, I was going to do Richard Wright. I was going to do Sidney Bechet. And there were a couple of other people. And I wanted to include James Baldwin because I knew Baldwin had spent a lot of time in France. But in investigating, I learned that Baldwin actually died in the south of France, not in Paris, and that his body was repatriated to New York. And so I was disappointed that I couldn't include Baldwin, but I did learn that there was a man named Beauford Delaney who was an artist. He was born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee, and moved to Boston and then to New York and then to Paris. And Baldwin met Beauford when Baldwin was 16 years old, 15, 16. But in any event, he met Beauford as a high school student when Beauford Delaney was living in Greenwich Village in New York. And he became a mentor of James Baldwin. And so I decided that I would look up Beauford Delaney because I knew from just by happenstance, I knew that he died in Paris and was buried somewhere in the area. So that was the beginning of the story. And the way that I was able to find the grave was that I had met a personal friend of Beauford Delaney, a man named Richard Gibson, who talked about Delaney during an evening event that I attended. It was a salon that was organized by a woman named Patricia LaPlante Collins. She's deceased now. But Patricia invited all kinds of people from all walks of life to these regular events. And so this night, Richard Gibson was the speaker, and he talked about his time in Paris. He spent a lot of time in Paris. He knew Beauford from when he was a teenager as well. And he talked about the fact that Beauford Delaney died in Paris. So I contacted him and I said, do you happen to know where Beauford Delaney is buried? And he said, yes, I do. And I've actually visited the grave, but I don't remember the actual details. So let me contact the people with whom I visited Beauford's grave and I'll get back to you. So when he reached out again, he had the name of the cemetery, which is Thiers. It's a suburb outside of Paris. He gave me the actual coordinates of the grave, so the division, the row number, and the tomb number. And he asked me if Beauford Delaney were still buried there. Mm-hmm. And I said, why would you ask that question? Why would he not still be there? And Richard said, don't you know that in France, people do not keep their graves forever necessarily? There is a sort of a leasing system. They called it a concession. And you have to pay money, or someone, obviously not you, you're in the ground, but someone has to pay money to keep that grave intact. Otherwise, the cemetery has the right to exhume the body and place the bones in a common grave. And the same is true if you are cremated. There is a little niche where your ashes are kept. And if your family or whoever does not continue to pay for that space, they remove that. And in the case of ashes, they sprinkle them in a garden. You know, this is news to me. I've been in Paris for quite some time, but never really thinking about cemeteries. So this is new to me, and I'm, mildly shocked. But I'm like, okay, I will go to this place and I will inquire about the grave. So I do that. And the person at the cemetery office is asking, well, who are you? And I said, well, I gave my name and I said, I'm writing an article about this gentleman, and friends of his have told me that he was buried here and they do not know if he is still here. So could you tell me if the grave is intact? And the woman sort of hesitated and she said, you're not family, so there's only a certain amount of information I can give you. And I said, well, that's fine. I just want to know where the grave is. I would like to go and visit it, take a picture of it for his friends. And I'm writing this article, so he would just be part of the article. The woman says, okay, yes, he is still in the ground. And I said, okay, thank you. The friends will be very happy to know that. Can you tell me when he might be exhumed? And she said, I can't give you an exact date, but he will be exhumed. He is scheduled to be exhumed this year. Now, mind you, I'm going to the cemetery in September. So I'm thinking, okay, he's still there. It's an interesting twist to my story, right? In my mind, this is an African-American man. He's an historical figure for me, but I have no personal connection with him. So I go out to the division And this is an immense cemetery, huge, huge, huge. And there are many, many divisions where they look, I'll just say, quote unquote, normal. There are divisions that are over the top elaborate. And then there are divisions where you wonder if anybody is really in there. And Beauford Delaney was in one of those. When I got to the division, I looked in. The division was horribly ill-kempt. Weeds literally as tall as my knees. I looked over the space and it looked as though it were, we'll just say, roughly half empty. It never occurred to me that there would be people in the spaces where there were no stones. And no one of Beauford's friends had relayed the information that he also did not have a stone. So I know the coordinates of the grave. I can't figure out how to find the grave because the rows are not numbered and the tomb slots or spaces are not numbered. And I also didn't know that there was no stone. So I'm thinking to myself, I have to go and look at these decrepit stones. And I could have done that, it would have taken some time. I could have done it, but I didn't want to waste time. So I'm just thinking to myself, how can I figure out? I'm looking to see if there's any signage to say, well, you've entered the division. This is row 1 or whatever. There was nothing. So finally, and I see the condition of the division after I've passed divisions that look much better. And I'm thinking to myself, this African-American man is in this division and it looks like crap. And so emotions are stirring in me. And I see 2 guards walking and I say, excuse me, this is all in French. I said, this is my first time at this cemetery. I don't understand how it works. I said, these are the coordinates of the grave that I'm looking for. And I don't know what row I'm standing at. I don't know in what order these graves are numbered. Am I at row 1 or am I at row, I don't even know how many rows there are in this division. And they were very kind. And they said, okay, he's in row 2. So this is row 2. So you have come in at row 1. Where you're standing is row 1. So row 2 is here. And they said, and you also happen to be in the first slot for this row. So the numbers get bigger as you go along. And they said, we will find the grave for you. So independently, these gentlemen walked off. It's like pacing. They walked off the graves and they independently came to a space with no stone that had a ceramic flower arrangement there. And they said, this is it. So I thanked them. They went on their way. And my heart was in my throat. And I took pictures of this space and I sent them back to the friends. Okay, there are 4 friends. And so one of them responded and said, oh, that flower arrangement is still there. And I said, so are you saying that you placed it there? And they said, yes, this really is the gravesite. So I felt, okay, so I have it, right? And I told them that, the grave was going to be exhumed that year. This is again in September. This is 2009. The grave is going to be exhumed that year. They will not tell me the exact date. And the friends were like, okay, he's in the ground. So can we pay the money to keep the grave intact? And I said, well, the cemetery office gave me sort of a hard time because I wasn't family. And I kind of doubt that they will allow you to do it because you're not family either. But they said, but could you just ask? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I did that. And as I'm talking to these people, they're telling me these stories about them and why Beaufort means so much to them. And this is becoming more personal to me. And I say, okay, I'm going to inquire about the best way to approach the cemetery because this is French bureaucracy. And I had already had all kinds of experiences with French bureaucracy. And I felt like this was not going to be easy. So I got some advice that because Beauford Delaney was a painter and because the French government owns his work, they might pay attention to this request, whereas they might otherwise have just said out of hand, no. So I wrote a letter and I gave this information in the letter. And the response came back, exceptionally, we will allow you to pay the money to keep this grave intact. And they gave me the figure, the monetary amount. It was less than 300 euros. So the friends sent me the money and I paid it, and the grave was kept intact for another period of time. Remember, the grave is leased, and it was a miracle that I ever found him in the ground in the first place, because he had died 30 years prior, and his concession was only for 6 years. Okay. So by all rights, he should have been gone long ago, but he was still there. So the friends sent me the money, I paid it, and they were ecstatic.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, okay, so he's still in the ground, so we want to place a stone there. And would you help us do that? Now, none of these friends is in France. One of them is in the UK, Richard Gibson, the man who told me about the location of the grave in the first place. He lived in the UK, and the other friends were in the US. So I'm doing all of this legwork. And by then I'm like, okay, I've got to do this. This is going to be a contribution, a tangible contribution that I can make to the preservation of African American presence in Paris. And, I found out how you do all of this. You go to these businesses where they create tombstones, and, you can have a headstone or you can have a full-length stone. Most people have a full-length stone. What does that cost? The friends said, we want something simple, but something durable, something that's going to last. And I, took pictures, sent them information, and they said, okay, we like this particular type of stone. It's simple, it's durable. We would like to place a little photograph of Beaufort on the grave. And it was going to cost a few thousand euros. So I said to myself, and they had some of the money, but they didn't have all of it. So I said to myself, I am not going to accept money from people for this stone in my own name, because thousands of euros, people get funny with their money, and it's like, who are you? And so I said, I'm going to create a nonprofit organization to raise the money for this stone. And I created Les Amis de Beauford Delaney, which is a French nonprofit association, to raise these euros so that we could place a stone. And we got the support of the U.S. Embassy for this. The ambassador at the time was Charles Rifkin. He wrote a beautiful letter that was posted on the embassy website and that we were allowed to share in the fundraising effort. And we raised the money fairly quickly. The stone was laid the following summer, 2010. And in the fall, we had a gravesite ceremony, and the U.S. Embassy sponsored a reception for us. And that was the beginning of my involvement with Beaufort Delaney.
I just love the story. So, question.
Yes.
Were you familiar with his work as an artist before this?
Not at all.
Wow.
Not at all. To me, he was a Black man who moved from the United States to Paris, as so many others have. He was a mentor of James Baldwin. That was my interest in him. He happened to be an artist.
And I want to ask you a question about art. Having experienced this and understanding his role, can you comment on what you now feel is the purpose of art?
Oh, art has many purposes. And I'm going to say these things not in any particular order. For the artist, I think art is a form of expression. It can be a form of self-expression. It can be a form of resistance. It can be a form of therapy. Okay. For the artist. For the people who view the art, it can be just simply aesthetic, pleasing or not. It can be a way to understand history, to understand contemporary life. It can be a way to connect with other people. Art can bring people together in a way that other things can't. So art has multiple purposes, functions, if you will. I'm not an artist. I did not study art in school. I'm not an art historian. I'm not any of that. I came to appreciate art through the life of this man.
Oh, it's a fascinating story. I really appreciate you sharing that with us and educating us in so many different ways. And I also want to talk about your other passion, which is supporting women. Share with my listeners, what are you excited about now, and what work are you doing as it pertains to women?
So there's a lot. So I have a U.S. nonprofit called the Wells International Foundation. It is domiciled in my hometown of Houston, Texas, but I operate it from Paris, France. We have multiple strategic focus areas, and one of those is women's empowerment. When I created the nonprofit, and incidentally, I created it with the intent to raise US dollars to do a live art exhibition on Beauford Delaney, and we were successful at that. But when I created the nonprofit, I decided to pour all of my personal and professional passions into it, and women's empowerment is one of those. And I particularly look at women from the vantage point of being, if you follow people who are looking at women in corporate life, there is this concept of the only woman. The woman who is the only person in the C-suite, or the woman who is the only director. She could be the only woman. She could be the only woman of color. And how does that woman show up in these positions of leadership and make herself heard and make herself effective and not lose herself in the process? We have these only women, and they may be the only woman in their work environment, and they may also be the only woman in their personal environment who has achieved what they have achieved. And so people look at her and they do not understand, while they may be proud or they may be admiring or whatever, they do not have an intrinsic understanding of how she became who she is and what she is doing on a daily basis in the world. And so she can feel alone. She can feel lonely. She can feel guilty because she is the only person who has achieved this level, and everybody else in her environment is like still, struggling financially or whatever. There are all kinds of things that go into being the only woman. And when you are the only woman of color, you can magnify that tenfold, 100-fold. So I can't say that I was only when I was working in veterinary pathology, but I was one of the damn few. Okay? Veterinary medicine is one of the least diverse professions in the United States. Less than 2% of all veterinarians in this country are Black. And when you go into the specialties, we are even fewer. So I understood what that meant. I also understood from the vantage point of being a person of color who dared to leave the United States and pursue a career abroad. Who does that? That's a very unusual profile. And there are all kinds of unusual profiles out there. And these women are alone and perhaps lonely. And so I felt that I could, through my life experience, support these women so that they felt, first of all, not alone, that somebody who really could understand from an experiential standpoint what they have gone through to get to where they are and what they might need to go through to get to where they want to be. Bring together women of this caliber, this demographic and this psychographic, and just support them from the inside out. So the other thing that I became acutely aware of as my career advanced was that I was placing all kinds of emphasis on my headspace, my intellect, all of the academic achievements and all of that, and sort of just cutting myself off at the neck and not listening to or paying attention to what was in my heart and what my gut, what my intuition was trying to tell me frequently. And there were some occasions, more than one, when I realized that I had sort of euphemistically shot myself in the foot because I did not listen to my gut and I did not listen to my heart. And I just went forth with all of these ideas and what was supposed to be and ended up regretting that. And so I began to realize that particularly for women who are in positions of influence, we need to be connected from head through to, if you're into chakras, through to the root chakra. We need to have all of that working together all the time. And I set out to create a program to help women do that. And that is called the L Cubed Alliance. And the 3 L's in L Cubed, if you don't know what cubed is, it's like L to the 3rd power. And the 3 L's are lifestyle, legacy, and leading by example. And we support women leaders, and in particular, values-driven women leaders. And we want to open up the channel from the head downward. And we want that channel to make a loop so that it's constantly flowing. So that when you go out into the world, you are fed by what is actually the source of your strength, which is it's your intuition. It is your heart. It is those emotions. It's all of that churning consistently, daily. And if you allow that to inform your brain, then you are infinitely powerful. Mm-hmm. And you can go out into the world and you can make the difference that you want to make in whatever capacity.
I'm just so grateful for having met you and to learn. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, educating us, informing us, inspiring us. You're an amazing woman. The last question I have for you is, what long-lasting impact do you want to have on people and the world we live in?
I think the underlying principle or desire of everything that I do is to encourage people to be the best people they can be. Each individual has so much to contribute in so many ways. You know, growing up, we are put into all kinds of boxes and we accept all kinds of stories about who we can be and who we should be and all of this. And I'm just like, break it all down. Break it all down. You, in whatever way you think you want to show up in the world, there are all kinds of things that are pulling you backward, tying you into one space. I want to break those chains. I want to cut those ropes. I want to free people from all of that. And most importantly, from their own limitations, the limitations that they have placed on themselves because they have accepted all of these stories, and just help them see that they have unlimited potential if only they will allow themselves to dig deep into their heart, their soul, and let that heart, soul, and mind work together in whatever capacity you are circulating in, whatever capacity you're working in, whatever capacity you are playing in the world. Bring your best self, and this is the way to do it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.